my latest live stream covering Apple's WWDC 2024. We have had 2 long and in-depth live streams covering all announcements going from iOS 18, iPadOS 18, macOS Sequoia, watchOS 11, tvOS 18, and visionOS 2, and Apple Intelligence, everything about its on-device processing to its private cloud compute stuff, to how it's integrating with ChatGPT from OpenAI. And basically, we have covered most of it already, but there's a lot more detail to go into. Now, as I've also outlined yesterday, there's also obviously every day I get more and more in depth with iOS 18, iPadOS 18, macOS Sequoia on my own devices. I do have watchOS 11 and tvOS 18 installed on my Apple TV 4K and my Apple Watch Ultra 2, but except for the suggestion to like share that I'm now starting a workout, so basically that other people know my location during it and whatever, I have not gotten yet any new gen features from those operating systems, though I will probably be watching a movie on my Apple TV this evening, and then I will check if maybe I play around with like the new subtitles or whatever. I don't think Insight is yet active, so my impressions of those operating systems remains limited by the fact that the first betas are quite limited, and that obviously my time thus far has been quite limited. For now, I do actually have something very interesting I wanted to react to. It's not super in-depth because, well, it's kind of a PR-ish interview, but it is MKBHD, the largest tech YouTuber in the world, taking an interview from Tim Cook, who is obviously Apple's CEO. For now, let's see. And before we start that, I did cover that yesterday briefly, but I do want to cover it again, which is Apple's stock price. Well, that one has absolutely exploded from being 5% up, close to 6% up yesterday. Apple is another 6% up. They're worth over $3.3 trillion now. They're once again the highest valued company in the world. Basically, AI helped a lot, and I actually think that the last few interviews that Tim Cook gave now to MKBHD, to iJustine, and some other executives have been also giving more information, have helped because they've been more aggressive in using the term AI instead of just applying it to Apple Intelligence. They seem to be actually like referring to artificial intelligence and how what they're doing is basically a little different from what others are doing, what they're making sure to make it safe. And this is how we are basically reaching the main topic of today, which is Tim Cook's interview with MKBHD explaining Apple's or just in general Apple Intelligence, how it works, and what was their main goal while designing it. As always, please guys, if you're watching, please consider subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying the content, liking the video. It helps tremendously with the algorithm, sharing it out to family and friends who you think might enjoy it so we can grow our community together. Comment both live during the live chat, but also when the video has been uploaded. That always helps. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker. All direct support is very, very much appreciated. I invested right back into the channel. And if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. Without further ado, let's get started with the MKBHD Tim Cook interview.
All right, Tim.
Great to see you.
Thanks for spending the time.
Thank you for coming.
And as always, let me know if the audio and video quality is working all right for you. Now, I didn't I pre-downloaded this video to like reduce any kind of bandwidth issues, but it's I always get paranoid about my streaming tech.
So you had the WWDC keynote today, which was really fun to watch. It was a whole 2 hours. I want to zoom all the way out because obviously a lot of talk about AI in general.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of just left wondering how Apple defines AI in general. Because I know if you ask a regular person, you might hear about generative AI.
And I just wanted to say, because this is specifically about Apple Intelligence, I usually, like, to me, whenever it comes to like press releases or like interviews that are highly curated, I don't enjoy them that much. I don't get too much out of them. But because AI is like a new era for Apple, similar to how Vision Pro started like a new era for them when it comes to AR and VR, even though obviously they have been dabbling in AR for years before that. I think it's actually very, very relevant to hear not as much new things that Tim Cook would say, but I think it's very important to hold them accountable by listening for anything that might be out of line, right? Basically, they've been actually super duper clear at WWDC what their plans are in many, many ways, from its focus on privacy and security to its focus for on-device integration and stuff like that. Tim Cook has made comments about AI in the past, similar to how he had been teasing Apple Vision Pro like 2 years before it actually came out, by talking a lot about AR. And I think it's important to know that, or at least to get the feeling that all Apple execs are sort of like towing one on one rope and trying to get to the same result. That we don't have any like NVIDIA-like people there who are secretly very much like, oh, I actually want all your data, because those people, in my opinion, no matter how talented, just don't belong at Apple. Yeah.
Chatbots, things like that.
Yeah.
And these are relatively new additions to Apple's AI portfolio. How do you look at AI as Apple?
Well, we've been executing with AI for a long time.
Right.
True.
It's at you're wearing a watch. It's at the root of the watch. I mean, you think about things like crash detection, fall detection, things like AFib, and all of this kind of stuff is machine learning at the end of the day. And so,
yeah, like the more intelligent data accumulation gets, and of course its analysis with ML, of course we have had AI for years and years. Like, I always go back to the snow leopard presentation by Apple during a WWDC, where like their previous software guy before Craig Federighi, Bertrand Soleil or something like that, something very French, and they had basically like a new text selection tool, which, well, it is basically text selection as we know it, but it was now much more intelligent at recognizing borders inside the document, going around images in a smart way, right? And he said, oh, we are using a little bit of AI, and he had like this delightful accent. And I just always go back to that, because the term AI over the years has shifted so much. Like, and of course, to any mathematician, the way we are now using like AI applying to like recursive algorithms was always a little bit of a joke to them. Then it was like to neural networks, and that was a little bit more appropriate. But now we have all those promises about like general artificial intelligence, which supposedly will beat humanity at absolutely everything. And now people are saying, well, it's still the same underlying tech. You're basically saying you are creating kind of like consciousness, or at least self-awareness, through more and more data, and we don't actually think that that's how it works for humans, right? So why should that be like the way to AI? This is what people are asking Sam Altman always about. It's like on your path to general artificial intelligence, what do you believe will be like the key to it? And his response basically universally is, well, like more data, more training, more processing power, things like that, more RAM. And that to me is always like, this is a very, very tech nerdy perspective to solving a fundamentally human problem. I do believe that more data and more compute will make AI better, but it will not make AI more human. And yeah, so it's a big discussion. I'm very glad that Apple is not trying to ingest AI into that kind of stupid discussion about Terminators. or about like hacking China and whatever, which some morons are talking about. Apple is just talking about like integrating better tools to make your devices work better, your apps work better, and the operating system you already know and love and are familiar with better. So that's basically what Apple is doing.
Captured people's imagination is generative AI.
Yeah.
And we see it as the opportunity for a whole new curve of technology and providing and doing more things for people.
And by the way, I just wanted to say, like, Apple is obviously in some ways behind when it comes to like the raw, like how large is our large language model, how large is our server computing it, what is the next data set of like 50 billion tokens that we are using to feed it or whatever. I won't deny that Apple is behind on those issues. The entire point that Apple is trying to make that, well, for one, they might not need quite as much because, for one, they're trying to make a lot of it run on device. They're also trying to stay a little more specific, a little less general, if you want to put it that way. And for that kind of stuff, they integrate with ChatGPT and maybe later on Google Gemini. And this is why Apple can be like the largest company in the world by market valuation, unless you count like Saudi Aramco, which is like a conglomerate that is partially owned by the government, and that doesn't count to me. But yeah, Apple knows how to invest their resources smartly, and they also know how to talk to people. I've outlined that yesterday when I said, well, some people complain about like Apple's marketing terms, like what is a Retina display? What is a Super Retina display? And they actually said, well, if you follow Apple enough, and or if you do like the most basic research, you will find that they actually use those terms in a very cohesive way, and you can almost predict what name they will use for a new product if you actually understand its capabilities. And similar here, Apple is not trying to push AI on you the way that like maybe Nvidia would want to, but Apple is trying to push better features to you, and some of those features happen to be machine learning. Some of them, like in the more traditional sense, some of them are machine learning, but much, much more expensive. And now they need more neural engines and whatever. And some of them are built in a way that they require more data, they require a lot more power. And now they're in the cloud and whatever you want. And I think that, again, if you follow Apple enough, you will feel the difference between them talking about like general machine learning, Apple Intelligence, capabilities for private cloud compute, the integration with ChatGPT. I think that in one presentation, they've actually made their plans very, very clear. It's just that those plans will also change as their own technical capabilities evolve. As I said, they are behind now, but Apple's extensive push into the AI as we know it is 1.5 years old. Basically, people are saying that it started during like the winter from 2022 to 2023 when Craig Federighi like tested out like some I believe some ChatGPT features or something like that, or maybe something from Microsoft, right? And that he basically turned Apple on the path to like be all in that. And I am very, very much convinced that he will see a decent return now that Apple is up like 12% in 2 days, thanks to them committing so hard to AI. They're committing to it in a different way than other companies, but they're still committing to it. And I'm very grateful that Tim is outlining it this way.
Providing an assistant for people, things that really improve people's lives. So that's how we see it. There's obviously, it's not without downside, and so we approach it very thoughtfully.
Sure.
And as you heard, we have always been focused on privacy. And so privacy is a very key tenet of our thrust into AI.
Right. It's been interesting to watch Apple's arc with AI because I made a whole piece not more than about a year ago about how Apple seems to never say AI, even though they have all these neural engines and machine learning and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so now
I apologize. If I ever do this, then it's me looking at the blue light on my microphone, being panicky about it potentially not working.
have almost this pivot where now we're just saying it. We're actually branding it Apple Intelligence now. I'm curious why that change now.
Well, in the beginning and throughout almost everything that we always do, we always talk about the benefit to the user. Mm-hmm. And so the benefit to the user is crash detection and fall detection, not the technology behind the feature.
Sure.
And so we still view it like that, but it became clear that people wanted to know our views on generative AI in particular.
Yeah.
This is very important. And Zuboito, what the fuck happened to my hair? Well, it's partially occluded by the algorithm, but yeah, I know, dude. It's been like such a few humid days, and yes, I do have curly hair. Thank you, brother. My God, they're always with the complaints here. Yeah, what I wanted to say that I like Apple's attitude towards like what matters is the feature, and you can sub-brand it in a way if that helps your stock or whatever or your market perception. But fundamentally, and he's bringing up stuff like fall and crash detection, but also just like a lot of underlying stuff inside iOS, like voice dictation being offline for quite a while, is obviously AI based by a lot of modern standards. And to me, what I love here is what you weren't complaining, it was just a question. Well, you said WTF, how else am I going to take that, man? Jesus Christ. And yeah, I really like that. I know that they have to brand stuff now, Apple Intelligence, because again, do I have to show you the stock price again? My God, it's going up every single time I look at it. But I'm still very happy that like for the first hour of Dub, they actually talked about like, they like use the terms machine learning over and over again instead of AI. They didn't even refer to the other features that then they outlined under Apple Intelligence. So people were actually confused quite a bit for that first hour. But I'm very, very happy that Apple is committing to this approach where they're like saying, look, the feature is what matters, not the underlying tech. We have done AI for years, but now we are expanding from like more traditional machine learning to generative AI, which we are now branding Apple Intelligence. Similar to all our previous efforts, it's focused on privacy and the benefit to the user rather than just pushing the technology itself. And whatever we make out of it, we will primarily talk about the actual feature and not the fact that it's AI.
And so we decided to embrace it and called it Apple Intelligence.
Okay. I have a quote from the Dua Lipa interview that you did.
Oh, okay.
It was great.
It was fun. She's fantastic.
I loved it. It was great. You had a quote that said about AI, if it can be used for nefarious things, we won't go down that road.
Yeah.
And at the time, I assumed.
I mean, yeah, companies always say that whenever they don't have something. My AirPods just flew down. I actually apologize, but I have to put them back because otherwise my Mac wants to connect to them, and now my iPad wants to connect to them. Put them in the wrong holes. It's always, as a man, you always have to know where to put it or not. Very important life lesson, guys. Yeah.
That meant.
And yeah, I wanted to say that yes, Vojo, I know I can be sometimes WTF, but on purpose, not because of my hair. But yeah, like for example, Google famously always had that slogan, like what was it? don't be evil, right? Or something like that. And that never applied to like Google's tech, really. Like at best you could make the argument that them refusing to bow to China's demands when it comes to bringing their tech to China was like that one example where they put like morals over money. But you could also make that the argument that China's demands would have probably killed like their services in China, and the likes of Alibaba would have just won anyway. Apple actually cares. Like nobody forced Apple to be dead focused on privacy. Like I know that obviously all companies have their marketing points, and sometimes you want to differentiate yourself with something that seems very pro-consumer or whatever. But just how aggressive Apple is in regards to privacy and things like that, nobody forced them to. That wasn't a general market demand. This wasn't even like something that most of their employees just like organically had like an epiphany about that. A lot of them were actually complaining like a year or two back that like, dude, we don't have enough data to feed like Siri or large language models, whatever, to compete with Microsoft or OpenAI or whatever. Like, should we maybe start collecting more data? And it ended up, at least supposedly, according to most rumors, that Apple actually ended up buying most of the data that they then used to train their LLMs on. So it's not like they actually got cheap data that they had access to. I'm sure they have some data they collect. There are some agreements in their terms of services where they obviously collect some data, but it's amazing that they still keep on focusing on that. And I've seen like people doubting that, even though Apple is like making their code available to like a third party, like our test company, to make sure that they never put any line of code there that allows them to access your data, be it the one processed on device or in private cloud compute. They're making like OpenAI ask for like your data on a per prompt basis. And yeah, I think the internet is just very, very stupid in that regard. And by the way, Zuboito, I will be going to I'll be going to a hairstylist by the end of the week. So hopefully that chills you down a little. If you want to help me with that, you can maybe donate a small super chat or a super sticker. Help me get rid of my sheep look here and return to humanity, basically.
Generative AI was off the table because of all the things that we'd seen about what it was potentially capable of or things that it might do. Has that changed? Is that something that was off the table and you figure now you've got the right tools or the right restrictions to make sure that that all goes super well? How do you think about that?
Generative AI was never off the table. Okay. It was
I will have even longer hair
in a thoughtful
that's
kind
exactly
of way.
what I'm going to do.
And so that's what we've done, and we've implemented it in ways that are less likely to create issues.
How so?
Well, things that, if you think about the kinds of things that we talked about
I'll take the Apple
context,
sheep in that way as a compliment.
And we talked about privacy. And so we're not waiting for a comprehensive privacy legislation, regulation to come into effect. We already view privacy as a fundamental human right. And so that's the lens that we see it at. And given that we're doing those things, personal context and privacy, we wanted to integrate it at a deep level. So you're not having to think, oh, well, now I want to do something that uses intelligence. We put it in the apps that you're already using.
Right.
So, Boito, my Twitter interactions right now are very, very hit and miss. I'm barely doing these streams. So if you have something very interesting to share, do it here too. You have me now for like the next half hour.
Integrated it deeply.
Right. Yeah, I think also now there's a lot of talk about it now
You're
that there is
always
generative
complaining,
AI.
and then I always prove you wrong, man.
Apple's notorious for never sending anything to the cloud. Everything's on device because that is the most secure way to do it, and was applauded for it. Interestingly, this is a little bit different now with a lot of these larger models, more complex requests. you actually do have to go off of device. So you've developed, I want to get the name right, private
cloud compute.
Explain this to us, because
Yeah.
I think the general chatter online is, well, they have to be sending data to OpenAI, for example, to get a request back from ChatGPT.
And by the way, Marquez is saying that, and he's actually correct. Like he isn't saying that like data has to be sent to the cloud. He's saying that the general chatter is like the general conversation is basically about them saying stuff like OpenAI. People are basically missing like that middle step. And so, Boito, I am always right. I'm not like your ex. I'm just really always right. So people are skipping this interim step and not understanding that OpenAI comes into effect. Well, it depends a little bit on your question, right? Sometimes it will probably not even try doing something on device or on private cloud compute. But in general, OpenAI is for stuff that Apple definitely believes that like their data sets and LLMs currently either cannot handle or they just don't want to make that stuff, right? I believe that Apple is not yet interested in making a general chatbot because it also comes with a very, very, very high investment in terms of money in that feature. Because you have to understand, like Apple never entered the search engine market, even though they obviously could have used like Safari's like monopolistic position on iOS to push a new search engine. The problem is now they would be like second or third fiddle to Google and Bing. And since they aren't like in control of it actually for the most part, now like what market force would make their search engine successful enough, right? And the same things with chatbots. Like, why waste internal resources on building giant servers and whatever? By the way, private cloud compute is confirmed by Apple to be running custom Apple silicon and be running entirely on renewable energy. So while obviously resources are still being expended for it, Apple is doing it still in the way that they have done a lot of things in the last couple of years, which is focus on privacy, security, and of course, like an environmental focus as well. You can argue how much you like each individual focus. You can discuss basically whether or not Apple is living up to their very, very high expectations that they set for themselves. But I don't think you can deny that they actually believe in those things. We can argue to the degree that they believe in them or to the degree they're successful in implementing those, but I just don't think you can completely ignore that Apple is still very unique when it comes to the big tech companies. They're also getting high amount of the money from Google every year. Yes, people have called Apple a monopoly for many things. I believe that the most immoral thing that Apple does is their search engine deal with Google, because I believe that this is money that is very much exchanging hands so that Google can keep their actually monopolistic stronghold over the search engine business. And Apple was even offered like by Microsoft to buy like Bing, the search engine, right? And they refused. Well, and partially has to do with stuff like, does Apple have the underlying technology? Does Apple want to invest in building all those cloud servers and whatever? Does Apple believe that it will be even successful, even slightly? And then the most important one is, does it make any sense in comparison to getting like 10, 12, 15, 20 billion dollars of Google every year, right? And to Google, it actually makes a lot of sense. I have said that with the rise of general chatbots, Google is actually in a pretty precarious position, because now with OpenAI sitting on top of private cloud compute and on top of on-device processing, right? I believe now that people will be interacting with ChatGPT at an absolutely unprecedented level. Now, I don't know what like the revenue share agreement between Apple and OpenAI will be. Maybe Apple will also have like a direct link at some point to OpenAI's data collection, right? Saying like, oh, we don't collect your data, but if you decide to give some data to OpenAI, now we have an agreement with OpenAI to also at least train on that data, right? While with Google, Google desperately wants Google Gemini integrated, and I actually believe that they will pay Apple like hand over fist to, even if it's a secondary option, or even if you have to in the beginning choose an option, or maybe if it's just that in the first list, right? Maybe the first time you run like a Siri query that cannot run on own device or on private cloud compute, and it comes up, do you want to send this to a chat bot, right? And then there's a list of maybe 3 providers at first, right? And on top sits Google Gemini for some reason, right? And I believe that Google will want to have that be part of their existing deal, because I believe that those chatbots, while I don't think that they will ever completely replace modern search engines, I do believe that Google is panicking about Apple working so close with a company like OpenAI. Remember when Apple like integrated like Bing image search in Siri? That was back then when Siri was stupid. Now Siri is intelligent, and it connects with something that isn't inferior to Google, but actually superior, right? So across the board, Google is now technologically like in an absolute chokehold. And I believe that that deal, even though I don't like it, it will continue, and it will probably get more and more expensive for Google every year if they want to keep Apple like from completely embracing companies like OpenAI, ChatGPTs, maybe even like Microsoft's Copilot, things like that. I think that in terms of business, what Apple is doing right now is actually so freaking impressive, and I think that investors like a day or two after WWDC actually realized that, oh, their stock's actually now down from the 6% up that it was. Now it's 5% up. But yeah, they're still like the most valuable company in the world by far. Like, well, there are 2 companies that are very close, but then everything else just exists in a completely different like a playing field, like $1 trillion less.
There's private cloud compute, and then there's the arrangement with OpenAI. These 2 things are different.
Okay.
And so if you look at private cloud compute, we're utilizing the same silicon, or not the same silicon, but the same basic architecture as the silicon.
They're not using A17 Pro chips. It's rumored that they're using like M2 Ultras. We don't know. Like some people have complained, well, if they say custom, what does that mean? It can mean something as basic as they're using a very different like server grade motherboard for all the extra bandwidth. Maybe they created like a new co-processor that like handles all the incoming data and whatever. Maybe it refers to the M2 Ultras that they're using are like very differently binned. Maybe they just can take chips that have like almost completely non-functioning CPUs, which obviously would be worthless in the consumer space, but now because the task runs on the neural engine and maybe to a degree on the GPU and maybe a tiny bit on the CPU, but not enough to really worry about that. So yeah, I believe this is what Apple refers to as custom. I don't think that right now they have a completely custom processor, even though one was rumored for like the Apple car. Like Mark Gurman was saying that they had a chip that was like 8 M2 Maxes or whatever, and that it was basically revolutionary in its data aggregation capabilities. Maybe they are building more of those, but for now it seems like they're repurposing hardware that they already had. Tell me, what do you think about giving only pro versions AI? You have to explain what you mean. Oh yeah, you mean the smartphone? It will depend once we test those devices. I actually think that this makes a lot of sense as a point. iPhone 15 Pro exclusive, right? I think the number one thing here is memory. Exclusive. Why can I not write, right? So it's 8 gigs of memory, right? We have heard that Apple's on-device language model uses like 4 gigabytes. When you are looking at a 6 gigabyte device, you're looking at like 5.6, 5.8 gigabytes of actually available memory. And then you have basically always 1 or 2 gigabytes of those reserved for the actual operating system. So it seems like 8 gigabytes. While I believe it would run on the 6 gigabyte model, let me make that clear, right? I actually think it could run on 6 gigabytes. However, it would result in your apps and your other system features constantly getting kicked out of memory, right? This was a problem for camera, especially on like 2 gigs of RAM devices, right? And then you saw the miracle of going to a 3 gig of RAM device, even if it was just like an iPhone 7 Plus versus an iPhone 7, and you could see that the overhead of the system, because obviously on a 2 gig system, if you give like, let's say 600 megabytes to the operating system, now that leaves you with 1.3 gigabytes, right? And then if the camera uses up another 300-400, now you're sub 1 gigabyte for everything else. This is why if you open the camera on a 2 gigs of RAM device, it usually closed some of your other apps, especially if you took like a video or something like that. On a 3 gigs of RAM device, now let's do the same calculation, right? We remove, let's even give it a little bit more memory per task, right? Let's give it 700 megabytes for the operating system. And let's say because the iPhone 7 Plus had like a dual camera system, let's make it take up 600 megabytes of RAM from the camera. Now we're talking 1.2 to 1.3 gigabytes taken up for operating system, and now that camera you open up, that leaves you now with 1.6, 1.7, 1.8 gigabytes for the rest of your apps. That means that most of the time your other apps probably won't have to close, at least back in the day when the apps were still relatively small. And the same thing is happening now, right? If you have a 6 gigs of RAM device, you have to consider, okay, let's say 1 gigabyte of it is taken up for the operating system, and now you are left with 5 gigabytes. And now you're running a large language model or a small language model that takes up 4.25 gigabytes. Well, now that leaves you with 800 megabytes for everything else. That's not enough in most cases. Now do the same calculations for 8 gigabytes, and let's be even more generous. Let's say the operating system there takes up 1.5 gigabytes, and now you're running the 4. Let's say the large language model is 4.5, right? So we can get to 6 gigabytes taken up. Now you're left with 2 gigabytes of RAM left. That's like at least twice as much. And that was with a very generous calculation. It is probably more like 3 times as much that is left. So it's not just that 8 gigabytes is 1/3 more than 6. It's that once you account for the fact that the RAM always has to do shit, it's actually more like 2 or 3 times more RAM left. The other thing is new A&E in A17 Pro. Right, we are talking primarily about int 8 calculations at I believe 35 tops inside the A17 Pro. Now the A16 actually does have the same LPDDR5 memory at 6400 megatransfers per second, so the actual memory bandwidth is not impacted that much. The cache is about the same between the A16 and the A17 Pro chip, so it really comes down to the new A&E does calculations, at least lower precision level calculations, definitely faster. Now, I don't know if it has any advantage in FP16 tasks, but it seems like most Apple Intelligence features are probably based around int 8. So you do have faster capabilities. The other thing is 3 nanometer, right? You have to account for like a fixed level of power consumption from those chips and given a certain task. And 3 nanometer obviously by itself is more efficient than even 4 nanometer on A16. So Apple will care about your battery life. This is, or they won't when they sell you an iPhone 16 Plus with a smaller battery, but then they will say, oh, it's N3E versus N4, so it's much more efficient. But yeah, the chip is more efficient, and that basically will also be part of Apple's task, that not only do they have a faster A&E in general, but that A&E can potentially perform much more intensive tasks at lower power consumption. You're saying you need more baseline for Mac. I think 8 gigabytes will be very limited in a year or two with AI. Microsoft is going with 16 gigabytes as minimum. Yes, my expectation is that M4 Max will start at 12 gigabytes of memory. We've already had that hardware part analysis of the iPad Pro. Supposedly, the 2 RAM modules that it's using are 7,500 megatransfers per second in speed, and there are 6 gig modules. I don't know if Apple is using like bint modules where like one part maybe doesn't work, or maybe they're just completely artificially locking them to 8 gigabytes, because right now they don't like have 12 gigs of RAM on Mac. So it probably would look weird if the iPad suddenly came with 12 gigabytes. But yes, I believe the M4 Max will start 12 gigabytes of RAM as base. Then the next iPad Pro will do the same, and the next iPhone, right? The iPhone, what would it be? The iPhone 17 Pro, that will start with 12 gigs of memory. And I believe, and once again, once we do the same calculation, right? Let's say the LLM is still the same size, right? Now it's 12. Let's give the operating system a full 2 gigabytes, right? Minus, let's say, let's even be generous to the large language model. Let's make it 5 gigabytes, right? So that's 7 gigabytes taking up. That leaves you with 5 gigabytes. Given how efficient iOS is when it comes to RAM management, that's a metric F ton. Yeah, obviously now with an 8 gig system, if we actually had 7 gigabytes of RAM consumed for system and AI, that left us with 1 gigabyte. And if would be looking at the 6 gig system, now we would be completely RAM restrained. Yeah, imagine running any of that on like iPhone SE2 or whatever. What do I don't know. I don't know about that iPad part because it could be like 6 gigabyte modules, but Apple is like sourcing so many of them, right? In like preparation for making them run on Mac, that they are using whatever ones that have like some defect in the RAM, right? To make them into 4 gigabyte ones, or they're completely artificially locking them down. Because, as I said, that's the discrepancy with the M3 Max that are already out. I don't like that. I hate it when like on like cars, for example, like there's like a heating or a cooling mechanism built into every car that is shipped, but then you have to still pay extra to enable it. I hate that stuff. Maybe macOS is good at memory optimization, but if application, yeah, and don't forget, macOS also does like system swap. While that probably won't be very good for AI stuff, it can at least like throw everything everything else that you are doing onto system storage, right? iOS, at least iPhones, don't really do that. So this is where you are actually really defined by how much RAM you have. Well, we'll introduce some AI stuff in them, no matter how much macOS. Yeah, we will definitely need more RAM. Optimization itself is not magic. And if Apple, in 2 years, maybe introduces Apple Intelligence 2, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, legit, running on, the then introduce, Right, if we are getting the 16 Pro, 16 Pro this fall, then we're getting the 17 and 17 Pro next fall. I wouldn't be surprised if then at the WWDC in 2026, Apple would be talking about like, well, some Apple Intelligence 2 features are exclusive to iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max or 17 Ultra or whatever, right? And then the iPhone 18 and 18 Pro would both have 12 gigs of RAM. Maybe the 18 Pro would have like 16 as an option or something like that. So yeah, I also believe that Apple can absolutely monetize that at some point. They could like create now a 2 terabyte iPhone model that costs like $600-$800 more, but it doesn't just double storage, it also doubles memory. You're also wondering how much impact on battery life all AI functionality will have. I couldn't tell you. I'm very curious about that myself. Oh, and by the way, the other thing is new CPU, new GPU. So there is a lot like just in general capabilities where like Apple has improved the machine learning accelerators for the CPU on the A17, on the M3 and M4. The GPU obviously does all your like your dynamic cache stuff, the new shaders, the ray tracing support. Now, the latter two might not matter that much for stuff like AI, but targeting in general a new architecture is pretty good for optimization. And then M1, M2, can just leverage all that power because they have a much larger memory bus, right? They have a lot more CPU cores. They have more GPU cores. They have more cache because every single core, every single GPU thing has like tile memory, cache, whatever. So even though those parts are built into devices with much larger batteries, I actually believe that like low key, the M4 iPad Pro will be like one of the best devices for like Apple Intelligence because because of how efficient M4 is with its super efficient OLED screen, right? The overhead versus an iPhone running the same tasks will just be very different.
That's in
Right.
that's in the iPhone
15, yeah.
and
Right.
and we're using the same software, and so we believe that we've done it in such a way.
By the way, guys, we have a couple more people watching. I just wanted to remind you again, please subscribe. Please comment on the video. As you guys can see, I love interacting with the live chat, but also comment on when the video has already been uploaded. Share it out to family and friends who might like it so we can grow our community. Leave a like, that helps out tremendously with the algorithm. Leave a super chat or a super sticker if you for a small donation. That money gets reinvested right back into the channel. All support is very, very much appreciated. And if you want to make that support long term, please subscribe to my Patreon. Link for that is in the description for this channel. Yeah, like M4 has like better like AI stuff due to ARM v9 and like scalable matrix executions and stuff like that on the CPU, but a CPU is very, very slow at AI acceleration. Even if you wanted to make an argument, you would probably be better off at like arguing the GPU is the best. But you could also make the point that like Apple does so much with machine learning beyond Apple Intelligence that this is where Apple probably wants faster AI on like the CPU and things like that, right? Because they also have tasks where like data is accumulated all the time. Like as I said, stuff like dictation can run on device. Text prediction, even before we go into like the higher capabilities of Apple Intelligence, all that stuff is like powered by neural processing.
Way that it's as safe and secure and private in the private cloud compute as the device. And so we really worked on this a lot and put a lot of wood behind that arrow to assure that. If you're working on something that requires world knowledge, so you're out of the the
local
domain of personal context and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
then
actually a really good explanation, right? The first two parts are personal context. Apple is basically saying, right? So if we do it like this, right? So until here, it's personal context, and then here, what Apple describes as world knowledge, right? I actually think that's a really good explanation, and I do believe that over time Apple might do more of those things themselves. But for now, they're partnering with OpenAI. I have zero issues with that.
you may want to go and use one of the large language models that are on the market. And we selected what we feel is the best one with OpenAI and ChatGPT. But you'll make a conscious decision to do that
Every time.
every time.
So you can guarantee that there will never be any data sent to OpenAI without your explicit user
That's
granted
right.
permission.
That's right. You decide.
Right. I also feel like there was this blip on the radar of standalone AI devices, which I found really interesting. They didn't land too well. I think smartphones are pretty great. But there was an
I find it fascinating that Tim doesn't really like emotionally react to that, because there would be like such an easy incentive to like dunk on those stupid standalone AI devices. But I think Tim is actually like a very respectful individual. Like, I know that obviously he's an executive and he's a suit or whatever, but Tim Cook literally works from like the early mornings to the late afternoons at Apple. He doesn't have to at his age. He has made way more than enough money. Do I have to bring up the stock price again? Oh my God, the stock price has gone down. Oh no. Well, it's still up tremendously, but whatever. There is zero argument to be made that Tim doesn't love Apple, that Tim didn't love like Steve Jobs, the way he handled Apple. Like, Tim has an extreme reverence for this company, the way it operates. He has certain principles. Yes, we can argue about how like his deep relationship to China maybe like paints some of his principles in a bad light. I'm absolutely open to that conversation, but I'm also open to the idea, because it's quite honestly the truth, that Tim Cook has certain like first principles that he stands by. That doesn't mean that like he doesn't believe in data collection in the pursuit of creating new technology. He just believes that the data collection has to happen in a certain way with a customer agreement and whatever. And beyond that, he also likes like stuff to be on device for the same privacy concerns, but also like security concerns, knowing that a cloud that has way too much data also becomes another liability for an individual, for the company running it and whatever. And this is why he has refrained from entering like a business, like competing directly with YouTube. So many people have asked like, oh, Apple Podcasts is pretty successful, but it's very like closed down, right? Like you have to be like approved in the similar way to like how the Apple developer program works. So you have to pay for it. Things like that. So why do we like not have like Apple like just making it available to anyone who wants to upload stuff? And part of that is, yeah, there would be a lot of like upfront investment necessary for that. Apple would have to make like build giant servers or partner with companies who build those servers for them. But it just so happens that it comes with multiple other concerns. How do they treat the stuff that gets uploaded? How do they recommend stuff that gets uploaded, right? Does Apple become yet another social media company that is only interested in pushing you deeper and deeper into a bubble? And Tim Cook is not interested in that shit. He also probably believes that investing into that stuff would create like a high opportunity cost, right? Because this is money and time and human resources that they could be investing into like creating more Apple Music stuff and more Apple TV stuff and more features for iPhone or a new iPhone in general, right? That's what he believes. you can argue whether you agree or disagree, whether you wanted Apple to enter any of those markets, but it is what it is. I think he has been very, very steadfast. Like, I always bring up people like Phil Spencer from Xbox, right? Like, he's like the CEO of Microsoft Gaming. That dude has no first principles. He just says shit that Satya Nadella tells him to say in order to keep his position. Like, without being an asshole, like, he's very much like, he has charisma and he appeals to people, and he is a gamer himself, so he can talk to people, to gamers a little more naturally, right? But he has flip-flopped on every issue, on like availability on other platforms, and on game preservation, on exclusivity deals. Like, he's been recently like critical of PlayStation's prior like deals with Call of Duty, even though Microsoft started those deals back in the Xbox 360 era. Like, Tim Cook is not one of those guys. Of course, he will say stuff to defend Apple, but you know that those things are still based on something deeper. He has enough power. He's the CEO. He has now been forming the company in his image for well over a decade. The people working under him are now very much people he knows and trusts. This is why, like, people who have been the initial like Steve Jobs guard, not a lot of them have left, but many have left in the beginning after Steve Jobs died, because Scott Forstall couldn't really bow his head to a new CEO. Johnny Ive eventually left because, well, Johnny Ive has been at it for so long, he just wanted to try something new. And then like people like Phil Spencer are obviously still very, very much in love with Apple and whatever. And he apparently still like works like a full work day even in his retirement. But it like was time for him to retire and become an Apple fellow. He didn't leave out of protest for Tim Cook. People like Craig Federighi and Eddie Q and all those people who are still very much at Apple, and like Tim Cook can say what he wants, and those people will support him as long as whatever he says still sort of lines up with the broader mission statement for Apple. It's not the way like Elon Musk says shit without any like respect for the people working for him, the way it will hurt the company, the way it might hurt the stock, the way it might like scare off consumers. This is not Tim. I believe Tim's like real character is a little more timid, a little more respectful of others. So I just wanted to give some respect, because I just noticed that the interview was like very soft, relatively slow, and it just comes off like very human, while still, of course, he has to stay like in the Apple CEO role and tell us things that are good for Apple. It's just the nature of the job.
Interesting conversation around that about using your phone less. Maybe having AI help you out in ways that let you spend less time on the screen. And this is something you echoed also in the Dua Lipa interview. Like, if you're looking at your phone more than you're looking into someone else's eyes, something's off there.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a potential future where we're using our phones less because of how well the intelligence works?
I think it's a possibility, and a significant possibility. I mean, for us, we've never been motivated for people to spend their lives on their devices. Our model is not one that needs engagement to succeed. Our model is one where we want to empower you to be able to do things you couldn't do otherwise. We want to give you a tool so you can do incredible things that you couldn't do without the tool. That's what motivates us. And
I've seen some backlash for that. I think people are mistaking a couple of things. Apple is a hardware company and remains a hardware company, and they build operating systems, apps, whatever, of course, so that you are still encouraged to use their hardware, because if you weren't going to use their hardware, you aren't going to buy them, right? But Apple is not like a live service gaming company trying to make you spend 12 hours a day in front of a game in the hope that you will eventually actually buy a certain microtransaction purchase. Now, Apple does operate the App Store, which has game developers and publishers like that. And Apple does obviously want you to listen to Apple. Well, Apple doesn't actually want you to listen to Apple Music that much, because this is how they pay out money to artists. While if you were not listening to Apple Music but giving them money, well, now it's basically their money, and whatever is the fixed sum that they give to record companies per month. So yeah, he's absolutely correct. Now, are there parts of Apple that are either do live on engagement or indirectly do so? Absolutely. But Apple, as a hardware company, a company that sells you iPhone, iPad, AirPods, Apple TV, Mac, and with all of those devices, also like different form factors, like MacBook, like a MacBook and Mac Mini and Mac Pro and whatever, right? And beyond that, just everything else. It's just so mind-boggling that some people are like doubting that, because Apple, even like the money Apple makes from services, it's not like that is so like engagement driven in the same way it's like done for everyone else. Like a lot of that money comes from like App Store commissions, from third-party purchases, and through like iCloud that is insanely profitable. Like, yeah, if you take more photos, you fill up iCloud faster, and then you buy a more expensive iCloud subscription, but it's not the same as Apple wanting you to spend 16 hours on your phone just taking photos to fill up your iCloud. That's just not a realistic thing.
And so we come out with things like screen time, et cetera. So it's a bit in your face as to how much you're using your device. We count your notifications and so forth, so that you can go in and say, do I really want this many notifications? And we have focus kinds of states where you can silence the phone.
Yeah, and I think Tim Cook is actually like, well, for one, he's a very informed CEO. Like, if you ask like Elon Musk these days about like the goings on at Tesla, right? He doesn't know half the shit they're putting into their cars at this point. But which is because he's so involved with X. But Tim Cook knows what's happening at Apple. Those features that he's bringing up, like they all perfectly like are counter arguments to the idea that Apple would want you to spend your life on their device. And he's like, well, no, we gave you like focus modes, and we gave you like screen time analysis, and we have parental controls to control either for like parents and all that stuff. It's like, once you know Apple, you know, of course, that they will also like do corporate bullshitting. I'm not questioning that, but it's so much less than the other big tech companies. Like Meta as a company is like bullshit. Like, its most likable thing right now is that fact that Zuckerberg got like a makeover. And I genuinely believe that Zuck probably is not a bad person himself. I just think that he started a company whose business model is really bad, and it just kept making so much money that he would never change his mind on it. And then other people have started depending on Meta making money on whatever. I believe that Google generally is not bad. I believe that Google is often misguided in trying to do a little bit of everything, so they're never left behind. This is how they create like their endless graveyard of like software and services that never fully live up to expectations. I also don't like some history behind Google, whether when it comes to like buying a lot of the companies that ultimately made their successes. That's an even worse problem when you think back to Facebook and how many companies they have acquired. Microsoft, I think, is not evil in the traditional sense. I just think the point by Steve Jobs that Microsoft has no taste is just so fundamentally true. And then once we also start talking about like acquisitions of other companies, especially the way Microsoft has behaved in the gaming space for the last 3-5 years, this is where we really start talking about actual commercial monopolistic practices the way that Apple never has done it. But and then like Amazon has like one cool business idea that doesn't actually make them too much profit, and then they had Amazon Web Services on the side, and this is what made them super profitable. So it's really hard to say which part of Amazon is good, which part is bad. I hate their Amazon Basics program because it's effectively used to like undercut other producers on their own storefront, destroy them, and then basically raise prices afterwards. But every company does that to a degree. I think Apple wants to do something similar with Apple Music to Spotify, because Spotify is like not profitable. I'm pretty sure Apple Music isn't either. If like Apple is paying higher royalties to artists, nowadays Apple Music is actually like $1 cheaper than Spotify. Apple is also giving you higher quality audio, and then they have all that research in development in creating like new features like karaoke and whatever. I think that Apple honestly really hates Spotify, because Apple is like, oh my god, we created iTunes, we created like a lot of the modern music distribution. How dare Spotify be first when it comes to music subscriptions,
etc. And so I do believe that as things get smarter and smarter with Apple Intelligence, that you can even take things that were taking more time will take less time now.
Right.
And so I do think that opportunity exists.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a curious future.
It is. It is, and I think I'm really optimistic about it.
Yeah. I feel like there was tons of chatter when you were first CEO of Apple about this new shift, obviously coming from Steve Jobs, and you've been CEO for what feels like a long time now, and we're entering this new age of AI, and I'm curious now.
Steve Jobs died in 2011, so we're now approaching 13 years of Tim Cook being CEO. And now Steve did step down before his death. His death happening right around the time of the iPhone 4S launch. So we might actually be now at 13 years.
Now there's new chatter about who the next CEO is going to be. What do you feel like your legacy as CEO at Apple should be?
Yeah, Marcus, I don't think about it.
Okay.
And so to me, a legacy is something that is defined by other people looking at you, not something that you define yourself.
Very fair.
And
like, I believe the last time he was asked that in like a direct way, he said like his most noticeable like legacy at Apple would be health. And they kind of understand that predates like Apple Vision Pro, that predates obviously now their new AI push. Quite honestly, if AI really gets as big as some people say, the fact that Apple has this unique approach to AI might actually be Tim Cook's legacy at the end, especially because it's happening at the end of his position as CEO. But that's recency bias. I don't want to commit to that. I still think that the overarching legacy of Tim Cook most likely will be that he allowed the company to move forward after Steve Jobs' death without many issues. I think that was for a moment in like the iOS 6 era under question, with like how disastrous the launch was of Apple Maps, the subsequent like problems with Scott Forstall, then the big redesign that was iOS 7, like basically being done in 9 months, and the questions were like, oh my god, older devices are now slowed down and whatever. Is Apple still committed to quality? And then I think once we hit like iPhone 6 especially, and we got like that tremendous sales success, iPhone 6, 6 Plus, the introduction of Apple Watch, and then not too long after like iPhone 7, 7 Plus, and the introduction of AirPods. And I think once we were there, right, and we had 2 new major project categories under Tim Cook, and both of them succeeded, I honestly think that's very impressive. What about AI and Vision Pro? There are 2 things about it. For one, there's no official Apple Intelligence for Vision OS 2, but apparently some worker at WWDC or some executive or whatever has given the response that first generation Vision Pro is not getting Apple Intelligence, that to me unfortunately does make sense, because while it does have M2, don't forget that this M2 has to do a lot when it comes to like 3D rendering and stuff like that. And even though it has 16 gigs of RAM, which, like, given that it always is handling like a high quality video feed and 3D data, and it's always has to be ready to like have like 8 or 12 windows in front of you, or tiles as Apple calls them. Quite honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I would be a little surprised if literally nothing comes to Vision Pro, like better text prediction and whatever. But it might be that Apple is just saying, look, we are better off making like an M4 and M5 Vision Pro 2 sooner than expected, marketing that on Apple Intelligence, trying to maybe bring down pricing to like $3,000, or at least like giving you a lot more storage at the $3,500 price, and then fully committing to AI on Vision Pro, because right now we would be killing like battery life and whatever. Next gen could be M5. Don't forget, even if we get M4 this fall, like next WWDC, we could still be up for a Vision Pro that has M4 rather than M5. But according to most rumors, we are probably not getting Vision Pro in 2025, but rather like a small revision in 2026, and maybe after 2027, then a big update. But I always say that Min-Chi Kuo, Mark Gurman, those guys are great when it comes to 1 year in advance predictions. But don't forget that 2 weeks before the iPad Pro event, Mark Gurman didn't know that it would have the M4. So Apple could easily just slide in the M4 into Vision Pro, sell out all the units that they have built, now, especially now that they are pushing them to other countries. And then in a year at next DubDub say like, oh, next gen Apple Intelligence built right into Vision OS 3, right into Vision Pro 2. They probably need to crack how to implement better UX with AI and Vision Pro. Yeah, a lot of the things that like you probably would want it to do right now. The problem is like the better Siri isn't even coming like right at launch, right? Well, like some capabilities are, but not all of it. And probably Siri would be like your most like direct partner for AI in Vision Pro. But then everything else, when it comes to like selecting text and working through the AI, through the user interface, yeah, Apple probably would want to give it at least an extra year. Similar to how the iPad used to wait for new iPhone design feature, for new iOS design features, because Apple wanted to adapt them in a better way for a larger screen with a different screen aspect ratio. And I think they have similar concerns now for Vision Pro with its completely different like viewing experience.
And so, and I typically, I'm always focused on the forward, not the rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. And that is a characteristic of Apple in general, is we're very focused on the forward.
I will say, out of the like FANG stocks, right, I think he's by far the best CEO. I think Satya Nadella comes close because, in my opinion, he's leading a worse company, but he's still leading it to tremendous success. I don't like some very specific decisions there, which and the inability to like retain talent that actually like cares about things that I care about, like that one guy who was like responsible for the Windows 11 redesign. The fact that this guy went away from Microsoft, in my opinion, is a big fail. Who else? Like Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. This guy has no clue at this point what he is doing. I believe that Google at this point is successful almost despite its Sundar Pichai. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Then who do we have? Well, we have Zuckerberg, but Zuckerberg right now it's like going on a ranch and like trying out new leather jacket. Oh yeah, I think the only other CEO that is very much close to Tim Cook given the company that he leads, is Jensen Huang for NVIDIA. Like that guy, that dude is cool. That dude knows how to present. He can be somewhat cringy, but then also he leads like events for like 2 hours nonstop. You're bound to make some cringy comments when you're like off the cuff for 2 hours. And like the new Amazon CEO is like, what do you ever hear of him? Like what else is even there, right? At that point, Jensen cracked AI. Exactly. Well, Jensen has like a company with like 2.3 times the PE ratio, right? Like price to earnings versus Apple. So they make less than half the profit that Apple does, but they have like about the same market valuation. So Jensen is a great. And speaking of him, Lisa Su, who is the CEO of AMD, I also believe that's a tremendous job. While I'm not super happy with the state of Radeon graphics, I generally appreciate how much she has pushed like Ryzen CPUs and stuff like that. In contrast, like the Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger, like this dude was like praised so much. Oh, we finally have an engineer that leads Intel, and what has really changed? Jensen is really like, he's on his own wave, dude.
Won't find a museum here, and yet we would have lots of things that you might like to see and reminisce about, but we just don't. It's just not a part of our culture.
Yeah.
And so I feel the same way personally.
This is actually similar to like how Nintendo always treats their shit, and a lot of people hate them for that, because Nintendo is also similar to like we are like a company that looks forward. We are trying out new gimmicks with hardware and our games. Now we are committed to long-standing like game franchises, for one because those make money, but also because we still have like super talented people in our company that even created those franchises, so it would be stupid to not keep them alive. But we are looking forward. We are not living in the past. We're not like resting on our laurels because, well, we are Mario, right? Doug Bowser is like the CEO of Nintendo right now. We haven't yet had him launch a new Switch, like a new console. So that will probably define his legacy as CEO. Now PlayStation has like 2 CEOs, which makes it a little bit more difficult to evaluate. And I think this is like, I could be going into more and more companies, but then I would go into companies that I know and care less and less about.
At some point, there will be another CEO. And
according to Mark Gurman, that CEO is supposedly, oh my God, how could I forgot his name? Oh my God, he's like the Apple Silicon guy. Not the Apple Silicon guy, but like the pro workflow guy. Oh my God. No, how could I forget? Apple CEO Bloomberg. Like his name is John. But which John? He's not Johnny Cerrugi, which is the Apple Silicon guy. John Turnus. Who is like the main hardware guy now at Apple, overseeing basically stuff. He is rumored to be the next Apple CEO, and I have actually said that years in advance before Mark Gurman said he was kind of like in discussion, because Craig Federighi, it makes no sense as a CEO because he's a software guy. So you would probably just give him more money, more resources, more freedom. If he ever was like, oh, I'm thinking of leaving the company, and they would be like, no, please stay, right? Then the Eddie Q, he's a services guy. He does what he does. He doesn't really pop up at events that much and stuff like that. Then there is Jeff Williams. I always want to call him John Williams. Jeff Williams, who is basically for Tim Cook what Tim Cook was for Steve Jobs. So I believe that if Tim Cook retires, I believe Jeff Williams would become like interim CEO or maybe even full-on CEO for like 2 or 3 years. But his main task would be to transition the company. Unless Tim wants to basically stay on until the very end, like maybe until like very, very old age. At that point, he could hand directly over to somebody like John Turnus. But Jeff Williams is just like 3 years younger than Tim Cook. If they choose him, he won't be serving for another decade regardless. So I believe the most natural progression is probably Tim Cook stepping down in 2026 maybe. Jeff Williams taking over until 2028. And then John Turnus taking over at that point and serving as CEO, well, depending on how well he does, for like the next 6 to 10 years. Don't forget, in time of Tim Cook, we got Apple Watch, AirPods, visionOS, Apple Intelligence. So yeah, I'm not downplaying Tim's accomplishments. I'm one of the guys who's always saying that Tim has had a tremendous legacy. Well, like he will have a tremendous legacy because he actually accomplished a lot. And don't forget, like a lot of products under Tim Cook, they weren't guaranteed successes. For example, the iPad, when Tim Cook took over, there were 2 iPads, the iPad and the iPad 2. And sure, they were selling well, but to keep executing on them, to create like models like the iPad mini, the iPad Pro, then changing the real iPad to the iPad Air, making it into a cohesively selling thing, that happened under Tim Cook. And Tim Cook still, by the way, lives by the Steve Jobs idea of the iPad, that the iPad is supposed to exist between the iPhone and the Mac. So whenever people are saying, well, Steve Jobs would like turn over in his grave, well, he definitely wouldn't in regard to the iPad. That was pretty much his pitch. What Apple is doing now with the iPad. It's just that the more capable Macs get and the more unique features iPads have, thanks to things like Apple Pencil, well, now the OS still has to evolve. Like it cannot be just a blown out smartphone user interface. We do have complicated stuff, but that comes with size. Like if you look at, for example, at Windows itself, it in of itself as an operating system, right? And I'm not talking about how it's perceived by consumers. I'm talking about all the legacy stuff built into it. I'm sorry. When you talk about like the fact that it still supports like 32-bit and the fact that they had all those programs trying to redesign it with tiles and they still sort of do with widgets. And Windows by itself is probably more complicated. It's like a platform that is like a developer-focused platform that supports like other like platforms on top, like Steam. Is probably more complicated than whatever Apple is doing as an entire company. Like you're saying, like 4 big iPhones is complicated. Don't forget when Steve Jobs died, like we were by the iPhone 4. Like he died before the iPhone 4S was introduced. Like there was no opportunity at that point in time to inject more iPhones into the product lineup. When you think about the iPod lineup, you will actually find that Steve Jobs was not against complexity. Like the iPod mini and Nano eventually, and all the constant redesigns for the iPods. And the way he created the iPod Touch is basically like an iPhone without cellular connectivity, and created like had like even iOS supporting it, so like an operating system shared between like an MP4 player and a smartphone, right? Like complexity always existed in Apple's lineup, and we might argue like, oh, there were fewer Macs in Apple's lineups. Well, Apple was selling fewer Macs in general, and then when you also look at something like the Mac Pro back in the day, well, that one had like complexity when it comes to, well, does it support NVIDIA graphics card, AMD graphics cards? Which drivers are the best right now? which are the best for macOS, which are the best for Boot Camp and Windows. So complexity has always existed, but we now have more complexity because Apple is now larger. Subodh, you have to explain your last message to me a little bit more.
And my whole focus in life will be on making them successful.
Yeah, I like that answer. It's a very LeBron answer. I feel like he's
is that right?
Things. Yeah. All right, I want to end with a little game.
Tim loved that cred, right? Like Tim loved that. I'm a little bit like LeBron. That he loved that genuinely.
These where it's a blind ranking. Have you seen what these are?
A blind ranking.
Blind ranking. So we're going to do a top 5 Apple products of all time. But I'm going to give you them one at a time, and you don't know what the rest of them are. So you have to rank the first one without knowing what 2, 3, 4, and 5 are.
Oh, okay. And this is your ranking?
This will be your unofficial ranking, just based on your.
This is the one part of the video that I couldn't pre-watch. He cannot do that. He is the freaking CEO. That's just so bad for him to say one product is like arbitrarily like number 5 or 4 without even knowing which other products are brought up, right? Like you don't know if that list includes like the iPhone, which is probably objectively the thing that changed Apple most. But then you also have like Will Marquez bring up like the Macintosh, or like Apple Lisa, which obviously are like time-wise more important, because obviously if Apple had failed back then they would have failed now. Oh wow, that is hard.
Reaction of how you feel about the
products. Oh, this is a tough one because
it is a tough one.
It's like asking you your favorite kids or nephews or nieces.
Yeah, I know that. I don't have kids. I know Tim Cook doesn't either, but I have 2 nieces and 1 nephew. Well, at least the ones I'm close to. I probably have more. But yeah, so it's very, very hard. I never rank my nieces and nephew.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 1, MacBook Air. It had that iconic moment of like taking it out the envelope on stage. It's the most popular laptop in the world, I think.
It's the most popular in the world, and that moment of taking it out of the folder.
Subodh, good night. Thank you for joining the stream.
Established a characteristic about that device that lives today. The first one, it wasn't about how many people would buy it.
Yeah.
It was about establishing the foundation.
Was that the first Air?
That was of any line.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. And so.
Yeah,
I'm going to fail miserably at giving you a ranking, but it was a huge moment.
Yeah.
A huge moment for the company.
The iPad.
I would arbitrarily say, again, I haven't pre-watched this part of the video. You're welcome, my... wait, what is it called? Like a sheep herder. You're my Apple sheep herder. MacBook Air, he said it would be a top 5. I'll arbitrarily give it a 4? I don't know.
And
Subodh, always nice having you in the chat. Thank
tablets
you so much
have been
for
in the
joining.
market for a long time. Well, our objective is never to be first. Our objective is to be best.
I remember all the rumors leading up to it.
And there were many rumors leading up to it, and people thought many things that weren't too nice about it in the beginning, including the name. And yet I couldn't live without my iPad today.
Yeah.
And so another huge moment. Oh wow!
Did you bring up the iPad next?
A huge moment for. I'm going to fail miserably at giving. Oh wow! Huge moment.
Yeah.
A huge moment for the company.
The iPad.
Oh, the iPad! My God, the iPad right after. Well, I'll be an asshole, and I care more about the. Oh, iPad. I'm afraid you will bring up iPhone, so I will give the iPad a 2, even though it's probably like my personal favorite Apple device.
Oh wow! Tablets had been in the market for
leading up.
Many things that weren't too nice about it in the beginning, including the name.
Yeah, because of maxi pads.
And yet I couldn't live without my iPad today.
Yeah.
And so another huge moment for the company.
I was worried my microphone
number 3 is
again.
the Magic Mouse.
Oh, the Magic Mouse. Oh, thank God. Thank you. So now the Magic Mouse, and I will give you my 2 cents about it. The Magic Mouse, oh my God, not 3, whatever, 5. The Magic Mouse is actually very important, but it pales in comparison to its Magic Trackpad counterpart. because with macOS Line, Apple was introducing multitasking gestures back in the day, and it was very important to obviously have hardware that supported it, and it was very important to not make like desktop users that are using a mouse behave very differently than laptop users, because macOS was starting to be built around those multitask gestures. And I can tell you, as somebody who like uses a good mouse with my Mac, I sometimes really, really feel that, yeah, the OS, it works great with a mouse, but it still works best with a trackpad. It's just I cannot really use it. Well, I'm not going to buy yet another $150 Magic Trackpad to put next to my MacBook while I'm streaming. I already do have the mouse, and I do some gaming with it, so it's multi-purpose. But yeah, like the Magic Mouse, as much as it gets memed on for obviously like its charging port, I still think that it was very, very important overall because of that push when Apple was like making the argument that I believe Steve Jobs said it. What if the iPad and the MacBook hooked up, and this is how we got like the second design of the MacBook Air, and around that time we got like larger glass trackpads, and we got like operating systems that supported them right out of the gate. So yeah, the Magic Mouse was a part of that, but it pales in comparison to the MacBook Air or iPad 2. Or iPad, which I ranked as iPad as the second position.
It was also an incredible moment.
But I think he has less to say about
that as much as they would the MacBook Air and the iPad and whatever else you're going to name, probably. But getting the ergonomics well done and was key.
I think he disagrees that it gets the ergonomics right. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
4 out of 5. The iPhone.
Oh my God. It changed the world.
It definitely changed the world.
It changed the world. And the simplicity of defining the three things that were
it's an iPod, it's a phone,
it's
an internet communications
to
device.
Think about it like that.
And this is why I say people don't understand just how much respect and like love Tim Cook holds for Steve Jobs. Like he knows shit. He cares. Like those moments meant a lot to him too. Like being like the finance guy behind a product as big as this, and then eventually like help him making it successful, and eventually becoming the CEO of that company. Because don't forget, Steve Jobs died really young. There was a chance that he never handed off his position as CEO to somebody like Tim Cook, who was somewhat close to his age. He could have at that point really looked to like a John Turnus or whatever and handed the position away maybe like 2 years ago or something like that. Or maybe Tim Cook would have become like an interim CEO, similar to how I described my plans that would evolve like Jeff Williams. Like Tim really cares here.
Of course, opening up, this isn't talked about as much, but initially you'll remember that there was not an app store.
Right.
The app store came a year later, and that changed everything.
This is
in the
why
developer
iPhone 3G is legitimately a huge upgrade.
Now I meet with students
because
every WWDC,
when it got cheaper,
and they give me such great inspiration.
It was bundled like with
there were
the
no
App
students
Store,
in the developer
huge.
community at that particular point in time. Mm-hmm. Now the developer population is very diverse from an age point of view and everything else, and it just fundamentally it became an economic miracle for people, and got well outside of just doing it for a hobby. It was, you look at all the businesses that came out of it.
Yeah, and now we have WWDC.
That's right.
Last but not least, Vision Pro.
Ooh. Well, Vision Pro, I have no problem putting it. Well, it's a blind ranking, right? So Vision Pro 3 is not bad. I would put it behind iPad for myself, but we also don't know its legacy right now, so that's one thing. But yeah, Vision Pro definitely. I don't know. I probably would put it, if it wasn't a blind ranking, ahead of the MacBook Air, though. It is ahead of the MacBook Air. What did I wanted to say? No, I wanted to actually say the opposite. I was going to say, if like in 2 years Vision Pro fails, I would obviously put like the MacBook Air ahead of it. But then again, MacBook Air is one subsection of the Mac lineup, while Vision Pro was its own brand new thing. And then we can argue about, was the iPad a brand new thing or almost like an offshoot of the iPhone? But I would argue, because of its already stronger legacy, I actually would probably stand by that top 5, even if it weren't blind.
Oh,
I'm so happy I gave the MacBook Air a 4, not a 3 or a 5, because at 5 it would have looked ridiculous next to the Magic Mouse, and at 3 it would have just completely clashed with products that, like, unless Vision Pro fails in 2 or 3 years, it would have looked ridiculous to have the MacBook Air ahead of the Vision Pro.
I love Vision Pro. I was just using it last night to look at the screening.
Yeah, what do you use Vision Pro for? I asked everybody who has one what they use it for.
I use it for the entertainment value. I use it
the
when
entertainment. that was the first like super exact thing. I want the entertainment, or I want one entertainment product, please. I know he's saying the entertainment value, but it just sounded hilarious.
I want to do multitasking because I find the multiple windows really effective. And
if only you gave that full capability to the iPad, but I know it has to do with size, but technically iPads also have like 16 gigs of RAM and like the same processor.
Doing this. Of course, I'm reviewing lots of apps on it right now, and some of those are enterprise apps, some people's proprietary apps that they want to share with us.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm seeing an extraordinary number.
Yeah, I guess Tim Cook probably doesn't, like, he probably handles a lot of day-to-day operations, but at this point, Apple has to be such a well-oiled machine for anything that isn't a brand new product. But then Vision Pro is a brand new product, so kind of makes sense that he would be doing stuff like even testing apps, deciding maybe this thing is worth showing off at DubDub, this thing is worth putting on at the top of the App Store.
And variety of things coming out of the enterprise area far earlier than we would have predicted.
Interesting.
Because businesses generally move slow to adopt.
Yeah.
And
especially
what we're seeing
enterprise.
is that half of the Fortune 100 is now buying Vision Pro for some project or the other, or exploring it. And so I'm looking at several of those, and I find that it's still an emotional experience to look at your photos, and with Vision OS 2, being able to take your old photos and make them 3D, I think is a big thing.
I've heard some people with early hands-on impressions that say that it works surprisingly good, which is honestly great.
And I lost both of my parents, and before Vision Pro came out, and being able to go back and look at those photos differently is something that it's an experience you can't replicate.
Sure. Well, we didn't get a blind ranking, but we got a pretty good retrospective of some of these products.
I think the retrospective is what matters. I personally I know iPhone is obviously more important than iPad, but if you actually know the history and know that the iPad development predates the iPhone, and that the iPhone was inspired by a lot of the things that went into the iPad, and then the iPad became the iPad because the iPhone was successful, and Apple figured out multi-touch and stuff like that on a bigger scale and whatever. I think those two products just deserve to coexist almost on like a pedestal of their own. And I think that Steve Jobs, the way he I think that's still the iPad presentation by Steve Jobs, just sitting on that chair interacting with Safari, YouTube. I just think it's probably the best hardware presentation, the new presentation of a new product ever, because it's just so down to earth, it's so direct. I think the original iPhone presentation, it might be close, but it's definitely not as good. I love the phone call Steve Jobs did to I believe Starbucks, where he said 1,000 lattes to go, please, or whatever. But Yeah, the I love the iPad, and I think the history of those two products deserves to be like connected, and more appreciation given to iPad, which I believe is often seen unfairly as just a larger iPhone.
Again, for
Thank
the
you.
time.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to the next feature drops and the next dub, but this was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great fun. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And there's obviously new iPhones to look forward to, new iPads. Guys, this was super fun. I actually got to relax a little in my chair. I was speaking a little bit more softly than usual. I really enjoyed this video. I did pre-watch half of it before during my workout, and now I actually got to really appreciate it more. Love some of the retrospectives with Tim's unique perspective, obviously. Hope you enjoyed some of mine, some of my takes on Apple Intelligence in general, maybe stuff like why or why not it should or shouldn't be exclusive to like iPhone 15 Pro series and then M1 and up. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please, as always, do the YouTube jazz, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out, comment on it. Feel free to support the channel directly if you catch me live with a super chat or a super sticker, or subscribe to my Patreon. Mike Shaw TV saying it was really great stuff, thanking me and saying you subbed up. That's very, very much appreciated, brother. Always love growing the community, especially our live viewers, because those help me be the best live streamer I can be. You guys comment while I'm live. You guys make fun of my hair. You guys make me know what you like, what you dislike. So every sub is appreciated, obviously. Every like, every comment, every share, every super chat, every super sticker, every subscription to my Patreon. However else you choose to engage with this community, you can follow me on Twitter. The link is also in the description, similar to my Patreon link. So thank you. Just an enormous thank you for also encouraging me to do more and more of this, because obviously the livelier the live chats, the more people on Twitter who I can now have heated discussions with, or who will come to my defense if I am in a heated discussion with somebody else. I love that. I love all of you guys. Please, as always, let me know what you would like to see me comment on next. Obviously, we have now gone through quite a lot when it comes to WWDC. I'm still thinking of how I would create other types of content, but for now, I'm really appreciating the ability to interact with you during the live streams. So we'll see. I'm also taking suggestions, of course. So please let me know what you think. That's my general gist at the end. I'll see you next time. Let me know what you would like to see me cover next. And this is Mark Tech, tuning out.